Reddit throwaway account here because, well, you'll see. My name's Ryan, and I need advice, or maybe just a vent, about how my life turned into a soap opera in record time. Let me set the stage. I've always prided myself on being independent. My dad's a big deal in the hotel industry, owns chains all over the world. But I've never wanted to ride his coattails. So, a couple of years ago, I got a job at one of his hotels. Not as a manager or anything cushy, but as a waiter. I wanted to prove I could work my way up. That's where I met her. Emily. Gorgeous, talented, and a molecular cuisine chef, if you can believe it. She had this confidence that pulled me in like she knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. At first, we were just co-workers. She'd stay late perfecting her little food sculptures, and I'd hang around, pretending to clean just to be near her. Over time, we started talking, laughing, flirting. It felt right. But here's the kicker. Emily had baggage. She'd just come out of a messy relationship with some pianist named Trevor. Apparently, they were hot and heavy for a couple of years, until he cheated on her. And not just with anyone, with her mom. Yeah, you read that right. Her mother, Diana, who also happened to own the hotel where we worked. Despite that scandalous backstory, Emily seemed like she'd moved on. And I guess I was naive enough to think I was the lucky guy who'd come along at the right time. Little did I know, this whole situation was like a ticking time bomb, and I was walking straight into the blast zone. I'll stop here for now, but trust me, things are about to go off the rails. Stay tuned, so. Things were going great between Emily and me, or so I thought. Diana, her mom, was oddly supportive of our relationship from the start. Like, over-the-top supportive. At first, I figured it was because Emily was still healing from the whole my ex slept with my mom debacle, and Diana felt guilty. Maybe helping Emily find a nice guy was her way of making amends. Diana started going out of her way to set us up. She'd conveniently schedule us on the same shifts, slip my name into conversations with Emily, and even accidentally leave restaurant gift cards in the break room for us. At one point, she pulled me aside and said, "Ryan, you're the kind of man Emily needs. Stable, loyal, and, well, not Trevor." That should have been my first red flag. Who pushes their daughter towards someone this hard? But back then, I didn't think much of it. Diana seemed nice, Emily was incredible, and honestly, I was falling hard. Fast forward a few months, and I mustered the courage to ask Emily out. We went on a few dates, dinners, hiking, lazy movie nights, and everything clicked. She'd tell me how refreshing it was to be with someone who wasn't a tortured artist or some kind of dramatic genius. I ate it up, thinking I was the guy who'd finally give her the stability she deserved. And for a while, I was on cloud nine. I got along with her friends, the hotel staff teased us like we were the office couple, and Diana even started hinting that we were destined for big things. But there was always this shadow. Whenever Trevor's name came up, and it came up a lot, Emily would get this faraway look in her eyes. She always dismissed it with a laugh, saying things like, "God, what a disaster that was," or "I can't believe I wasted so much time on him." But something felt off. I just couldn't put my finger on it. One night, after a small party with some co-workers, Diana cornered me in the kitchen. She poured us both a glass of wine and said, "You know, you're the kind of guy who could really change Emily's life. A man with your background, you could give her the world." I didn't understand what she was getting at. I wasn't using my dad's money or influence. I was just a waiter trying to make his own way. But Diana smiled like she knew something I didn't. "You're going to be good for her," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "Trust me." At the time, I thought she was just being weirdly enthusiastic. Looking back, though, that moment was the beginning of a very, very twisted plan. And let me tell you, the cracks were about to start showing. Fast forward about a year. Things were going so well with Emily that I started thinking about taking the next step. I know, classic rookie move, right? But when you're in love, you don't see the warning signs, or maybe you just choose to ignore them. I decided to propose. Yeah, a grand gesture, because that's what Emily deserved, or so I thought. Diana was thrilled when I told her my plan. She even offered to host the engagement party at the hotel, free of charge. "It'll be perfect," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. At the time, I thought it was just motherly enthusiasm. Now I realized she had her own reasons for pushing things along. The night of the party was magical, at least on the surface. All our co-workers were there, The food was top-notch, of course, because Emily oversaw the menu, and the hotel's rooftop was decked out with fairy lights and candles. It was one of those moments that felt like it came straight out of a rom-com. After dinner, I took Emily aside and led her up to the roof. Everyone followed, phones out, ready to capture the moment. My hands were shaking as I got down on one knee and popped the question. Her face lit up, and she said yes without hesitation. Cue applause, tears, and a whole lot of champagne. But here's where things start to get weird. Trevor showed up. Yeah, that Trevor, the cheating ex-pianist who'd hooked up with Emily's mom. Apparently, he still worked as a part-time musician at the hotel, and someone, Diana, maybe, had invited him to play during the party. I didn't even realize he was there until Emily froze mid-laugh while cutting the cake. She excused herself, saying she needed a breather, and disappeared. Diana gave me this tight-lipped smile and said, "Don't worry, dear. She just needs a moment to process everything." About 20 minutes later, I started to get worried. I went looking for Emily, asking around, but no one had seen her. Then someone mentioned they'd seen her heading toward the rooftop with Trevor. My stomach dropped. Trying not to jump to conclusions, I went up to the roof, but by the time I got there, it was empty. Just the sound of the city below and a couple of forgotten champagne glasses on the ledge. I chalked it up to my imagination and figured she'd just needed space. She came back a little while later, acting totally normal. She kissed me, smiled for photos, and spent the rest of the night mingling. I pushed the strange moment to the back of my mind, convincing myself it was nothing. Little did I know, that night would come back to haunt me in ways I couldn't even imagine. And the worst part? I wouldn't find out the truth until it was way too late. The days after the engagement party were strange. Emily was acting normal, maybe too normal. She was affectionate, cheerful, and seemed genuinely excited to start planning the wedding. But something felt off, and I couldn't shake the image of her disappearing with Trevor during the party. At first, I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she said yes to my proposal in front of everyone, and she seemed genuinely happy about it. But little things started piling up. For one, she was suddenly very protective of her phone. Emily had never been one of those people glued to her screen, but now it was always in her hand or face down on the table. She also started working late more often. She'd say things like, "I need to prep for a new menu," or "the sous chef called out, so I'm covering," and while it sounded plausible, the timing was just suspicious. Then there was Diana. She started acting weird too. Normally, she was all over me, asking about wedding plans and gushing about how perfect Emily and I were together. But now, she was avoiding me. Whenever I brought up the wedding, she'd quickly change the subject or make some excuse to leave the conversation. At one point, she even said, "Maybe don't rush into things, Ryan. Take your time." Take my time? The same woman who had been pushing us together since day one was now telling me to slow down. It didn't make sense. I started feeling like I was losing my mind. The nagging suspicion wouldn't go away, but I didn't have any proof. And I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure fiancé snooping through his partner's stuff. So, I tried to trust her. That lasted until one random Tuesday night. Emily came home late, around midnight, claiming she'd been at the restaurant dealing with a refrigeration issue. She smelled like wine, not unusual for her job, but there was something else. A faint hint of cologne. I didn't say anything at first, but when I kissed her goodnight, she turned her head, brushing me off with a quick, "I'm exhausted. Let's talk tomorrow." The next day, I casually asked her about her late night. "Did you get the fridge sorted?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She hesitated just for a second, but then smiled and said, "Yeah, it was a nightmare. I had to call a technician." It sounded believable, until I checked the fridge myself. It was fine. No issues. No technician had been called. I even asked one of her coworkers, and they had no idea what I was talking about. My stomach churned. Something was definitely going on, but I still didn't know what, or who was behind it. I started to feel like an outsider in my own relationship, like there was this whole other world Emily was living in that I wasn't a part of. And then, just as I was trying to figure out how to confront her, the next bombshell dropped. And it was a big one that about a month after the engagement party, I got an anonymous text message. It was late at night, and I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of Emily's strange behavior. My phone buzzed, and when I opened the message, my blood ran cold. The text said, "You deserve to know the truth. Emily's been lying to you. Check the rooftop security footage from the night of your engagement party." At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. Who would send this? And how would they even know something happened that night? My mind immediately went to Trevor. Could he be trying to stir up trouble? Or maybe Diana. Her behavior had been odd lately, and she clearly had her own agenda. But the part of me that had been doubting Emily for weeks couldn't just ignore it. I worked at the hotel, and I knew how to access the security footage. It felt wrong, like I was crossing some line, but curiosity and that gnawing feeling in my gut got the better of me. The next morning, I waited until my shift was over and snuck into the security office. I logged into the system and found the timestamp for the engagement party. I scanned through the footage, my heart pounding so hard I could barely focus. And then I saw it. Around the time Emily had disappeared from the party, she and Trevor were on the rooftop. The camera didn't pick up audio, but their body language said it all. They were standing close, way too close. She was laughing, touching his arm, looking at him in a way that made my stomach churn. Then he leaned in and kissed her. She didn't pull away. She kissed him back. They broke apart quickly, as if they knew they were being watched, and Trevor grabbed her hand, pulling her closer. I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the footage, my hands shaking, and sat there in the dark security room, trying to process what I'd just seen. It felt like my entire world had just been yanked out from under me. This wasn't some fleeting moment of weakness. It was a betrayal on the night I proposed to her, in the very place where we were supposed to be celebrating our future. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to march up to Emily and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I walked out of the security room, called in sick for my next shift, and went home to try to figure out what the hell I was going to do. That night, Emily came home late again. She kissed me on the cheek, acted like everything was fine, and climbed into bed like she hadn't just detonated our entire relationship. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But the anger, the hurt, and the disbelief were bubbling under the surface. And I knew it was only a matter of time before everything exploded, that I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the rooftop footage over and over in my mind. Every little detail gnawed at me. The way Emily smiled at Trevor, the way she leaned into his kiss like it was the most natural thing in the world. How could she do this to me? How could she stand in front of all our friends, say yes to my proposal, and then turn around and... that? The anger was unbearable, but beneath it was this deep, crushing sadness. I loved her. I still loved her. And that was the worst part. My brain was screaming at me to storm into the kitchen and confront her right then and there, but my heart was holding me back, whispering, "What if there's more to the story? What if you're wrong?" So, I waited. I thought maybe if I gave myself time, I'd find a way to approach it without blowing up my entire life in one conversation. I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. But my patience only made things worse. The next morning, Emily woke up like nothing was wrong. She hummed as she got dressed for work, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "I was thinking we should go venue shopping this weekend. Maybe we can check out that vineyard Diana mentioned?" I stared at her, my throat tight. How could she talk about wedding venues when she was sneaking off to rooftops with her ex? The words were on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to tell her I knew, to demand answers. But instead, I nodded mutely and watched her leave. The day dragged on. I couldn't focus on anything. I skipped work, ignored my phone, and just sat in the apartment, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me still wanted to believe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe she was drunk, and it didn't mean anything. But the other part of me, the one that had been noticing the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the lies, knew better. By the time Emily came home, I'd made a decision. I was going to confront her. No more waiting, no more excuses. I deserved the truth, even if it hurt. But as soon as she walked through the door, my resolve faltered. She looked tired, almost fragile, like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. She dropped her bag on the counter and gave me a small smile. "Long day," she said, kicking off her shoes. "What about you?" I couldn't bring myself to say it. "Not yet." Instead, I just shrugged and mumbled something about being tired. She nodded, then disappeared into the bathroom to take a shower. As the water ran, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, wondering what the hell I was doing. This pattern went on for days. Every time I thought I was ready to confront her, I'd chicken out. She'd smile at me, kiss me, or talk about the wedding plans, and I'd lose my nerve. It was like living with a stranger, someone who looked like the woman I loved, but felt like a complete mystery. And then everything came to a head. It was a Friday night, exactly 1 month after the engagement party. Emily was supposed to be working late again, but something about her excuse didn't sit right with me. So, I decided to test her. I called the restaurant around 8 p.m., pretending to be a customer asking about reservations. The host told me Emily wasn't in, hadn't been all day. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. This was it. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I grabbed my coat, got in the car, and drove to the hotel. If she wasn't at work, there was only one other place she could be. When I got there, the lobby was quiet. Most of the staff knew me, so no one questioned why I was there. I took the elevator up to the rooftop, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe she was somewhere else entirely, and I was just being paranoid. But as the elevator doors opened, I heard voices. It was Emily and Trevor. They were standing by the ledge, their backs to me. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I caught bits and pieces. "Don't know how much longer I can do this," Emily was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "He's not stupid, Trevor. He's going to figure it out." Trevor said something I couldn't hear, and then Emily laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "I feel like I'm living a double life," she said. "And honestly, I don't even know if I want this anymore." That was it. I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Want what anymore?" I said, stepping onto the rooftop. They both spun around, their faces pale. Emily's eyes widened in shock, and for a split second, I saw something that looked like guilt flash across her face. Trevor, on the other hand, just smirked, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Ryan," Emily started, her voice shaky. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "Really?" Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my fiancée has been sneaking around with her ex. Trevor crossed his arms, clearly unfazed. "Look, man, this doesn't have to be a big deal." "Shut up," I snapped, cutting him off. My eyes were locked on Emily. "How long has this been going on?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, like she couldn't decide what to say. Finally, she blurted out, "It was a mistake, Ryan. I swear. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" My voice cracked. "You've been lying to me for weeks, sneaking around behind my back, and you're telling me it didn't mean anything." She stepped closer, reaching for me, but I backed away. "I love you," she said desperately. "Please, you have to believe me." I shook my head, my heart shattering into a million pieces. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." For a moment, none of us said anything. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of traffic below. Finally, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there on the rooftop. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but one thing was clear. The life I thought I had with Emily was over, and I don't remember much about the drive home that night. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, rage, heartbreak, disbelief. I kept replaying the scene on the rooftop, over and over, like some sick movie I couldn't turn off. Emily's face, Trevor's smug smirk, the lies, all of it felt unreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. When I got home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Her things were everywhere. Her coat draped over the chair, her favorite mug on the counter, her perfume still lingering in the air. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This was the life we were supposed to share, the future we were supposed to build together. And now it was all a lie. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and sat on the couch, trying to numb the pain. Every sip burned, but it didn't stop the thoughts. How long had this been going on? Was it just Trevor, or had there been others? Did Diana know? The questions were endless, and the answers felt like they would destroy me. Sometime after midnight, Emily came home. I heard the key in the lock, the door creaking open. She stepped inside and froze when she saw me sitting there, the half-empty bottle in my hand. Ryan, she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. Can we talk? I looked at her, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. Talk? Now you want to talk? My voice was hoarse, dripping with bitterness. She set her bag down and stepped closer. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand. Understand what? I snapped, cutting her off. That you've been sneaking around with Trevor? That you kissed him the night I proposed to you? That you've been lying to my face for weeks? What exactly am I supposed to understand? Emily. She flinched, like my words had physically hurt her. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but then her expression hardened. It wasn't like that, she said defensively. It wasn't some big affair. It was just complicated. I laughed bitterly. Complicated? That's your excuse? You cheated on me, Emily. You made me think we were building a life together, and all the while, you were running back to him. She shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger now. It wasn't like that, she shouted. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was confused, okay? Trevor. He's always had this hold on me. But I chose you, Ryan. I said yes to you. You chose me? I spat, my voice rising. Is that supposed to make me feel better? You don't get to choose me after you've already betrayed me. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Emily looked at me, her eyes searching mine, but I couldn't tell if she was looking for forgiveness or a way to justify what she'd done. Either way, I didn't have it in me to give her either. Finally, she sighed and sat down on the armchair across from me. I don't know what you want me to say, she murmured. I made a mistake. I messed up, but I love you, Ryan. I don't want to lose you. Her words should have meant something, but they felt hollow, like she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, trying to keep myself from exploding. I need to know one thing, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. The night of the engagement party, did you sleep with him? Her silence was deafening. I looked up, my heart pounding. Emily, did you sleep with him? She hesitated, and in that moment I already knew the answer. But hearing her say, it still felt like a knife to the chest. Yes, she admitted, her voice trembling. But it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. I was drunk, and it just happened. I stood up so fast the chair nearly toppled over. It didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice shaking with fury. You slept with him on the night I proposed to you, Emily. Do you even hear yourself? Tears streamed down her face now, but I couldn't bring myself to care. She reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't, I said, my voice cracking. Don't touch me. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, the woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and all I felt was empty. I need you to leave, I said finally. She looked at me like I'd just slapped her. Ryan, please, leave, I repeated, my voice firm. I can't do this right now. I need space. For a moment, she didn't move, like she thought I might change my mind. But when she saw the look on my face, she nodded slowly, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. As the door clicked shut behind her, I sank onto the couch, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I was alone now, but at least I didn't have to pretend anymore. That was the night I realized my life would never be the same. The silence after Emily left was deafening. I sat there in the dark, staring at the door like she might walk back in and tell me it was all some twisted misunderstanding. But she didn't. I was alone, with nothing but my thoughts and the wreckage of our relationship. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Trevor on the rooftop, laughing, kissing, breaking every promise we'd made to each other. And when I wasn't picturing that, I was replaying her confession. Yes, but it didn't mean anything. The words echoed in my head like a bad song I couldn't turn off. By morning, I felt like a shell of myself. But I knew I couldn't just sit around drowning in my misery. I had to figure out what to do next. The first step was telling someone, anyone, what had happened. I needed to get it off my chest, even if it made me feel like a fool. I called my best friend Mike. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy. Ryan? Dude, it's 7 a.m. What's up? Emily cheated on me, I blurted out. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's story. There was a long pause, and then Mike said, What the hell? Are you serious? Yeah, I said, my voice breaking. She slept with Trevor. The night I proposed. Mike swore under his breath. I knew something was off about that guy. What kind of psychopath shows up to his ex's engagement party? And Emily? Jesus, man, I'm so sorry. I told him everything. The late nights, the lies, the rooftop footage. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. Mike didn't say much, but he didn't have to. Just having someone listen made the weight on my chest feel a little lighter. So what now, he asked. I don't know, I admitted. I told her to leave, but I don't know if it's permanent. I mean, I still love her, Mike. He sighed. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But you deserve better than this, man. She broke your trust, and it wasn't just some stupid mistake. It was premeditated. You got to ask yourself if you can ever really move past that. His words hit me harder than I expected. Could I forgive her? Could I ever look at her again without seeing Trevor's smug face or hearing her excuses? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't think straight with her still in my life. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into work, hoping it would distract me, but every time I walked into the hotel, I felt like I was walking through a minefield. Emily worked in the kitchen, and even though I avoided her shifts, it was impossible not to hear whispers from the staff. Apparently, the rumor mill was working overtime. Everyone knew something had happened between us, but no one knew the full story, except for Diana. Diana cornered me in the hallway one afternoon. Ryan, she said, her voice dripping with concern. Are you okay? You look tired. I stared at her, wondering how much she actually knew. I'm fine, I said curtly, trying to walk away. But she stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Look, I know things are complicated with Emily right now, but she loves you, Ryan. Don't throw everything away over one mistake. My blood boiled. Did she send you to talk to me? I snapped. No, Diana said quickly. This is me trying to help. I know my daughter better than anyone, and I know she regrets what happened. Do you? I asked, my voice cold. Because if you knew her so well, maybe you could have stopped her from sleeping with her ex. Or was that part of your little plan too? Diana's face fell, and for a split second, I thought I saw guilt flash in her eyes. But then she composed herself, straightening her posture. You're angry, and I get it. But don't let that anger ruin something good. You and Emily belong together. I laughed bitterly. No, Diana. You and Trevor belong together. Maybe you two can bond over how much you've both screwed up her life. Her eyes widened in shock, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. I walked away, my heart pounding, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Diana had been meddling in our relationship from the start, and now I was starting to wonder how much of it was her pushing for what was best for Emily, and how much of it was about protecting herself. That night, Emily texted me. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I wanted to ignore her, to block her number and move on. But a part of me still needed answers. I needed closure, even if it hurt. I texted back, tomorrow, my place, 7 p.m. When she showed up, I could tell she'd been crying. Her eyes were red, her hair messy, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She stepped inside, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. I've been a wreck, she said quietly. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what I did, about how much I hurt you. Good, I said bluntly. You should feel like a wreck. She flinched but didn't argue. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling. But I want to try to make this right. I love you, Ryan. I don't want to lose you. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. Then why did you do it? If you love me so much, why did you go to Trevor? Why did you kiss him? Why did you sleep with him? Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. I don't know, she whispered. I was scared. Scared of committing, scared of everything. Trevor was familiar, and I let myself fall into old habits. But it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You keep saying it didn't mean anything, but it meant enough for you to throw everything away. So tell me, Emily, what am I supposed to do with that? She didn't have an answer. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I realized I didn't want one. Nothing she said would fix what she'd done, and no amount of tears or apologies would make me forget the betrayal. "I think you should go," I said finally, my voice cold and steady. Her face crumpled, and she started to say something, but I held up a hand. "We're done, Emily. I can't do this anymore." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears as she turned to leave. She paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. "I'm so sorry, Ryan," she whispered. And then she was gone. This time, for good. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space where she'd stood, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't over yet. I still had a lot of healing to do, but at least now I could finally start. The first few days after Emily left for good were a strange mix of relief and pain. I'd made the decision to end things, and part of me felt lighter for it, like I'd finally taken control of my life again. But the emptiness she left behind was suffocating. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the future I thought we were building together. The apartment was full of reminders of her. Her favorite blanket was still draped over the couch. The books she'd left stacked on the nightstand stared at me every morning like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Even the damn fridge mocked me with leftovers from meals she'd cooked. I spent a lot of time trying to distract myself. I worked double shifts at the hotel, hoping exhaustion would keep my mind from wandering. It didn't. Every time I saw someone in the kitchen, I wondered if they'd seen her with Trevor. Every time I passed the rooftop, my stomach churned with memories of that night. And then there was Diana. She cornered me again a few days after Emily left, this time in the hallway outside the staff locker rooms. Her perfectly composed exterior was gone. She looked frazzled, almost desperate. "Ryan, I need to talk to you," she said, grabbing my arm before I could walk away. "I have nothing to say to you," I snapped, yanking my arm free. Her eyes widened, but she didn't back off. "Please just listen. I know I've made mistakes, and I know you're angry, but I care about you. I care about Emily." I scoffed. "You care about Emily? Is that why you've been meddling in her life since the day I met her? Or was it because you felt guilty about screwing up her last relationship?" Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she sighed and nodded. "You're right," she admitted. "I've been trying to fix things, and I've made everything worse. But Ryan, you have to believe me. I only wanted what was best for her." I shook my head. "If you wanted what was best for her, you would have stayed out of her life and let her make her own decisions." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I was done playing nice. "Diana," I said, my voice cold, "your daughter made her decision, and so did I. This conversation is over." I walked away without waiting for her response, leaving her standing there in the hallway. It felt good to finally stand up for myself, but the anger lingered long after she was gone. That weekend, Mike dragged me out for drinks, saying I needed a break from my misery cave. I didn't want to go, but he was relentless. "Come on, man," he said. "You need to get out, talk to people, and remember there's a world outside of Emily." Reluctantly, I agreed. We went to this dive bar downtown, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the music is loud enough to drown out your thoughts. I wasn't in the mood to socialize, but the alcohol helped take the edge off. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Mike kept the conversation light, cracking jokes and reminiscing about old times. For a while, it almost felt normal. But then, halfway through the night, he leaned in and said, "So, what's the plan now?" I stared at him confused. "What do you mean? Are you staying here? At the hotel? Or are you going to take some time off? Maybe go stay with your dad for a bit?" The idea of going to my dad made my stomach turn. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove I didn't need his money or his connections, and running to him now felt like admitting defeat. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't really thought about it." Mike nodded. "Well, whatever you do, just remember you've got people who care about you. Don't let this thing with Emily define you." I nodded, but his words hit harder than I expected. The truth was I did feel defined by it. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a betrayal that had shaken my entire sense of self. How could I move on when every part of my life was tied to her? The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a gnawing sense of dread. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. It was too full of memories, too suffocating. I decided to pack up a few things and crash at a friend's place for a while. Maybe some distance would help me figure out my next move. As I was packing, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. A small box tucked under the bed. I opened it and found the engagement ring. I'd forgotten I'd put it there after the party, back when I was still naive enough to think everything would work out. I held the ring in my hand, turning it over and over. It felt heavy, like it carried the weight of all the promises Emily and I had broken. For a moment, I considered throwing it out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I shoved it back in the box and tucked it into my suitcase. Maybe one day, I'd figure out what to do with it. For now, all I knew was that I needed to leave, to find a way to start over. And as I locked the door behind me, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't let this break me. Emily and Trevor might have stolen my trust, but they wouldn't steal my future. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of this mess, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to be okay again. Leaving the apartment felt like shedding an old skin. I stayed with Mike for a few weeks, sleeping on his couch and trying to piece myself back together. The space helped, but it wasn't easy. Everywhere I went, it felt like I was dragging the weight of the betrayal with me. Emily texted me a few times during those weeks. Nothing dramatic, just messages like, "I hope you're okay," or "Can we talk? I still care about you." I never responded. I told myself it was because I didn't have anything left to say, but the truth was I didn't trust myself. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to risk falling into the trap of her apologies and promises. I needed to keep my distance. Eventually, I decided it was time to make a bigger move. Staying in the same city, working at the same hotel, seeing the same people, it wasn't helping. It was like being stuck in a loop, replaying the same painful memories over and over. I needed a fresh start. That's when my dad came into the picture. We hadn't spoken much over the past year. He'd always supported my decision to work at the hotel and make my own way, but I knew he didn't fully understand it. He'd built an empire, and as far as he was concerned, I should have been running it, not bussing tables in one of his properties. But when I called him and told him I needed a change, he didn't hesitate. "Come to New York," he said. "I'll set you up with something in corporate. You don't have to stay forever, just long enough to get your feet back under you." I didn't want to take the offer. It felt like admitting failure, like everything I'd been trying to prove to myself had been a waste of time. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep spinning my wheels. I needed to do something, and maybe this was the break I needed. So, I packed up my things and moved to New York. My dad put me up in a small but comfortable apartment in Manhattan and got me a position in one of his hotels. Not as a waiter this time, but as part of the management team. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but it was a step up, and it gave me a chance to focus on something other than my personal life. At first, the change of scenery helped. New York was a whirlwind of activity, and the fast pace kept me distracted. I threw myself into work, learning everything I could about the business. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was making progress, like I was moving forward. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just go away. It lingers, creeping into your thoughts when you least expect it. Some nights, I'd lie awake in my new apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering where it had all gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Had I been too blind? Too trusting? Or was Emily just a master manipulator? Someone who had always been destined to hurt me? I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure I ever would. About a month after I moved, I got an unexpected email. It was from Diana. The subject line read, "I need to tell you something." I almost deleted it without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was long, much longer than I expected, and it was filled with everything I didn't want to hear. Diana admitted to knowing about Emily and Trevor's affair. She said she'd found out shortly after the engagement party, but hadn't told me because she didn't want to ruin things between us. She claimed she thought Emily would end things with Trevor and that it was just a temporary lapse in judgment. But the part that hit me the hardest was this. Diana had been pushing Emily toward me because she thought I was safe. She didn't think I'd ever hurt Emily, not like Trevor had. And she thought marrying me would give Emily the stability she needed to finally move on from her past. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Diana hadn't just meddled. She'd orchestrated the whole thing. She'd played me, manipulated me into believing I was the right person for Emily, all while knowing the truth about her betrayal. The email ended with a plea for forgiveness. Diana said she was sorry for what she'd done and that she hoped I could move on and find happiness, even if it wasn't with Emily. I closed the email without responding. What was there to say? Diana's confession didn't change anything. It just added another layer to the mess. In the weeks that followed, I started seeing a therapist. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew I couldn't keep carrying the weight of everything on my own. Talking to someone helped. For the first time, I had a space to unpack my feelings without fear of judgment or expectation. Slowly but surely, I started to heal. I focused on my career, building new connections, and rediscovering the parts of myself I'd lost in the chaos. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the anger and sadness threatened to pull me under. But I was learning to let go, to accept that some things, some people just weren't meant to be. And as for Emily, I haven't heard from her since that last text. I don't know where she is or what she's doing. And honestly, I don't want to know. She made her choices, and I'm finally making mine. For the first time in a long time, I'm starting to believe that there's a future waiting for me. One that's not defined by betrayal or heartbreak. One that's mine, and mine alone. Moving on wasn't as simple as closing the door on Emily and Diana. They lingered in the background of my life, not physically, but emotionally, like a shadow that stretched across everything I did. Therapy was helping, but some days felt like running in circles. I'd make progress, go a few days without thinking about her, and then, out of nowhere, something would trigger a memory, and I'd spiral all over again. The hotel world didn't make it easier. Every day, I was surrounded by couples on their honeymoons, families celebrating anniversaries, and strangers toasting to love. It was a cruel reminder of what I thought I had and what had been ripped away from me. I started avoiding certain areas of the hotel, wedding suites, romantic dining spaces, anything that made me feel like I was staring at a version of my life I could never have. But New York had its own way of swallowing you up, and for that, I was grateful. The constant rush of people, the noise, the chaos, it left little room to dwell on the past. I started to fill my days with work and new hobbies. I took up running, not because I enjoyed it, but because the pounding of my feet against the pavement drowned out the noise in my head. I even tried dating apps once, though I deleted them after a week. I wasn't ready, not yet. Then about 2 months after I'd moved, something happened that shook me all over again. I was sitting in a cafe near the hotel, going over some reports, when I heard a voice I recognized. Ryan. I looked up, and my heart nearly stopped. It was Trevor. He looked different, older somehow, like the weight of his actions had caught up with him. He wasn't wearing his usual smug smirk. Instead, he looked hesitant, almost nervous. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly, my voice sharper than I intended. "I work at the Midtown branch," he said, gesturing vaguely. "I didn't know you were in New York." "Well, now you know." I turned back to my reports, hoping he'd take the hint and leave, but of course he didn't. "Look, man," he said, sitting down across from me without asking. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I need to talk to you. You've got about 30 seconds before I walk out of here," I said, not bothering to look up. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to apologize. For everything." I finally looked up, narrowing my eyes. "You think an apology is going to fix what you did?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't, but I need to say it anyway. I was an idiot, Ryan. I messed up with Emily, with you, with everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it." His words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him exactly how much damage he'd done. But another part of me, the part that had spent months in therapy trying to let go of the anger, just felt tired. "Why now?" I asked finally. "Why bother apologizing at all?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I've been doing a lot of thinking. And I realized I've spent most of my life screwing people over. I don't want to be that guy anymore." I didn't believe him, not entirely. Trevor had always been good with words, but his actions rarely matched them. Still, there was something in his expression that made me pause. Maybe he was telling the truth, or maybe he was just trying to ease his own guilt. Either way, I didn't owe him anything. "You've said your piece," I said, standing up. "Now stay out of my life." He nodded, looking almost relieved. Fair enough. I hope you find happiness, Ryan. You deserve it. I walked out without another word, my heart pounding. Seeing him brought back every ugly emotion I'd worked so hard to bury. But as I stepped back into the chaos of the city, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't okay. Not completely, but I was no longer drowning in the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. Trevor was my past. Emily was my past. And I was finally ready to stop letting them control my future. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened the box with the engagement ring. I stared at it for a long time, the weight of what it represented pressing down on me. Then I made a decision. The next morning, I went to a jeweler and sold it. The price wasn't what I'd paid for it, but I didn't care. I used the money to book a trip, a week-long getaway to a small beach town in Mexico. It was impulsive and out of character, but that's exactly why I did it. I needed to get away, to give myself the chance to start fresh. As I boarded the plane a week later, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't running from my pain. I was running towards something new, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. Touching down in Mexico felt like entering another world. The salty ocean breeze hit me the moment I stepped off the plane, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. I'd booked a small beachfront bungalow in a quiet town. No luxury hotels, no bustling city streets, just sand, sea, and solitude. The first few days were surreal. I'd wake up to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, drink coffee on the little porch overlooking the ocean, and spend hours walking along the beach, letting the water lap at my feet. It felt cleansing, like the ocean was slowly washing away all the pain and bitterness I'd been carrying. I kept my phone off most of the time. No texts, no emails, no reminders of the life I'd left behind. It was just me and my thoughts, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid to face them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself sitting on the beach, staring at the endless expanse of water. The memories I'd been trying to outrun crept back in, but this time, they didn't overwhelm me. Instead, I let myself sit with them, turning them over in my mind like seashells on the shore. I thought about Emily, about the way she used to light up when she talked about her passion for food, about the moments when I truly believed we were building something real. But those memories were tainted now, overshadowed by her lies and betrayal. Still, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Maybe that was the hardest part, accepting that I could love someone and still know they weren't right for me. And then there was Trevor, the man who had taken so much from me without a second thought. I'd spent months hating him, imagining ways to make him pay. But now I just felt pity. He'd spent his life breaking things, relationships, trust, people, and I didn't want to be another casualty in his path of destruction. And Diana, well, I didn't know what to think about her anymore. She tried to play puppeteer with all our lives, and in the process, she'd only added to the chaos. But I couldn't blame her for everything. At the end of the day, Emily had made her own choices, and so had I. By the end of the week, I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. The ocean had a way of putting things into perspective, of reminding me how small and fleeting my problems were in the grand scheme of things. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could move forward. On my last night in Mexico, I met a woman named Sophia. She was a bartender at the little beachside restaurant I'd been frequenting, and she had this warm, infectious energy that was impossible to ignore. She'd noticed me sitting alone every night and finally came over to introduce herself. "You've got a lot on your mind," she said with a knowing smile as she handed me a cocktail. "Want to talk about it?" Normally, I would have brushed her off, but something about her felt safe. So I told her everything. Not in detail, but enough for her to get the picture. When I finished, she leaned back and looked at me thoughtfully. "You've been through hell," she said, her voice soft. "But you're still standing. That says a lot." I laughed bitterly. Barely counts," she said, grinning. "You've got a long road ahead of you, but you've already taken the hardest step, letting go." Her words stuck with me. I'd been so focused on the pain and the betrayal that I hadn't stopped to think about how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person who had sat in that security room watching the rooftop footage. I wasn't the same person who had begged Emily for answers or lashed out at Diana. I was someone else now, someone stronger. When I boarded the plane back to New York the next morning, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't fully healed, and I didn't have all the answers, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The trip hadn't fixed everything, but it had given me something I hadn't had in a long time: hope. And for the first time, I felt like that was enough. Coming back to New York after a week of sun-soaked clarity was a jarring experience. The city buzzed with its usual chaos, the streets crowded with people rushing to get somewhere. It didn't feel like home. It felt like I'd been dropped into someone else's life. But maybe that was the point. I was building a new life now, one that didn't revolve around Emily or the mess she'd left behind. The first few days back were challenging. My coworkers at the hotel had questions about my sudden disappearance, about my new attitude. I brushed most of them off with vague answers, not ready to share the details of my escape. Mike was the only one who knew where I'd gone, and even he seemed surprised by the change in me. "You seem different," he said one night as we grabbed a beer after work. "Not like you've forgotten everything, but like you're not letting it eat you alive anymore." "I think I just realized I deserve better," I said simply. And for the first time, I actually believed it. But, of course, reality had a way of testing my newfound peace. A week after I returned, I got a message from Emily. It wasn't long, just a simple, "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." My initial reaction was anger. How dare she try to come back into my life after everything? But as I stared at the message, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. What could she possibly have to say now, after months of silence? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We met at a small cafe near Central Park. I got there early, nursing a black coffee and mentally preparing myself for whatever emotional roller coaster was about to unfold. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, her usually confident posture replaced by something more hesitant, almost timid. "Hi," she said softly as she sat down across from me. "Hi," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't want to make this easy for her, but I also didn't want to make it harder than it needed to be. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She fiddled with her coffee cup, her eyes darting around the room like she was trying to gather the courage to start. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow. "You've apologized before." "I know," she said quickly, "but I mean a real one. No excuses, no justifications. I messed up, Ryan. I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to fix, and I hate myself for it." Her voice cracked, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. "Not anymore. I've been in therapy," she continued, "trying to figure out why I keep sabotaging the good things in my life. And every time, it comes back to you, to us. I destroyed something beautiful, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I took a sip of my coffee, letting her sit with the silence. Finally, I said, "Why did you ask me here, Emily? What do you want from me?" She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, and I wanted to ask if there's any chance we could start over." The question hit me like a freight train. Part of me wanted to laugh, to tell her how ridiculous she sounded. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the love we once shared, hesitated. "I don't think that's possible," I said finally, my voice steady but firm. "Too much has happened, Emily. I've moved on, or at least I'm trying to, and I think you need to do the same." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling. I needed to try." For the first time, I saw her as human. Not the woman who betrayed me, not the person who destroyed our relationship, but someone who was deeply flawed and trying to find her way. And while I couldn't let her back into my life, I realized I could let go of the resentment I'd been holding on to. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily," I said quietly. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. "I hope you do too." Walking out of that cafe felt like closing the final chapter of a book I'd been stuck in for far too long. There was no dramatic ending, no grand resolution, Just two people finally letting go of something that was never meant to be. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not just from Emily, but from the weight of everything that had happened. And as I stepped out into the crisp New York air, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new one. After the meeting with Emily, something shifted in me. It was subtle at first, a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, I wasn't replaying every argument, every lie, every betrayal. I wasn't imagining scenarios where things could have gone differently. Instead, I felt a strange sense of closure, like the weight of the past had finally lifted off my shoulders. I went back to my routine, but it felt different now. Work was no longer just a distraction. It became a challenge I actually looked forward to. I started taking on bigger projects, working with teams on initiatives to improve the hotel's operations. My boss noticed my renewed focus and hinted that there might be a promotion on the horizon. For the first time, I felt like I was building something for myself, something real. One weekend, Mike convinced me to join him at a networking event for young professionals in the hospitality industry. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. I still wasn't ready to dive back into socializing, but he insisted. Look, he said, it's not about meeting people. It's about showing the industry that you're here, you're serious, and you're not just Ryan, the waiter. You're Ryan, the guy who's going places. Reluctantly, I agreed. The event was held at a sleek rooftop bar downtown, and as soon as I walked in, I felt out of place. Everyone was dressed to the nines, sipping cocktails and throwing around buzzwords like they were trying to outdo each other. I stuck close to Mike, nursing a whiskey and letting him do most of the talking. But then I met her. Her name was Claire. She wasn't loud or flashy like some of the other people there. She had a quiet confidence that drew me in. We started talking about the industry, and I was surprised by how easy it was to open up to her. She'd been working in hotel design for a boutique firm, and her passion for creating spaces that felt like home was infectious. "What about you?" she asked, tilting her head with genuine curiosity. "Why'd you get into hospitality?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Honestly, I wanted to prove I could make it on my own. My dad owns a hotel chain, but I didn't want to ride his coattails. So, I started at the bottom, working as a waiter, and here I am. She smiled. I respect that. It takes guts to step out of someone's shadow. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself or apologize for my choices. Claire didn't care about my baggage. She just seemed interested in me. We talked for hours, and by the end of the night, I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in months. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I started seeing each other more. It wasn't serious, not at first, but it was exactly what I needed. She had a way of grounding me, of making me feel like the world wasn't as heavy as I'd made it out to be. We'd spend hours walking through the city, talking about everything from work to travel to our favorite books. With her, I didn't feel like the guy who'd been cheated on, the guy who'd been broken. I felt like myself again. One night, as we sat on a bench in Central Park, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she turned to me and said, "You're not as guarded as you think you are." I raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" She smiled. "Because when you talk about the things you love, your work, your family, even your struggles, it's like you forget to put up walls. You let people see the real you." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I'd been hiding behind my pain, using it as an excuse to keep people at arm's length. But with Claire, I didn't feel the need to hide. I felt seen, and that terrified me in the best way. I wasn't ready to call it love. Not yet, but I was starting to believe in the possibility of it. Claire wasn't a replacement for Emily or a way to forget the past. She was something new, something entirely her own. And for the first time, I felt like I was ready to let someone in again. At work, things were also looking up. My boss officially offered me a promotion, assistant director of operations, and I accepted without hesitation. It felt like a validation of everything I'd been working toward, a sign that I was finally moving forward. I called my dad to tell him the news, and for the first time in years, I felt like he was proud of me, not for being his son, but for being my own person. "Good job, Ryan," he said over the phone. "I always knew you had it in you." One evening, as I walked home from work, I stopped by a small jewelry shop I'd passed 100 times before, but never noticed. The display in the window caught my eye, simple elegant designs that felt understated but meaningful. I wasn't there to buy anything, but I found myself lingering, thinking about how far I'd come since I'd sold Emily's engagement ring. That ring had represented so much pain, so many broken promises. But now, standing in that shop, I realized it didn't define me anymore. I was more than that chapter of my life. I was more than the man Emily had betrayed. I walked out of the shop with nothing in my hands but a feeling of peace in my heart. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking ahead, and the future didn't seem so scary anymore. It felt full of possibility. The next few months felt like stepping into a version of my life I didn't recognize. One where I wasn't defined by heartbreak, where I could finally see a path forward. Claire became an unexpected but steady part of my days. We weren't rushing into anything, but every moment with her felt genuine. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after everything, that was enough. Work kept me busy. The new role as assistant director of operations was demanding, but fulfilling. I threw myself into it, finding joy in the challenge of problem solving and making improvements. For the first time, I felt like I was building a career, not just running from my past. One afternoon, about 6 months after I'd left my old life behind, I got a call from Diana. Seeing her name on my phone screen was jarring, like hearing a ghost whisper your name in broad daylight. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But something in me, a need for closure, maybe compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, my tone neutral. "Ryan," she said, her voice warm but hesitant. "It's been a while. How are you?" "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my guard up. "What do you need, Diana?" She sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. Instead, she said, "I wanted to let you know, Emily's moving. She got a job in Chicago, and she thought it would be best to start fresh." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me was relieved. I wouldn't have to worry about running into her or hearing about her from mutual acquaintances anymore. But another part of me felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing. Just a quiet sense of finality. "I hope it works out for her," I said simply. Diana hesitated, then added, "She's doing better, you know. She talks about you sometimes. She knows she messed up, but she wants you to know she's working on herself." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "I hope she finds what she's looking for." There was a long pause before Diana said, "You're a good man, Ryan. Better than most. I'm sorry for everything." Her words caught me off guard, but I didn't dwell on them. "Take care, Diana," I said before ending the call. It was strange. Hearing about Emily didn't hurt anymore. It felt like closing a book I'd already finished, one I didn't need to read again. A few weeks later, Claire and I decided to take a weekend trip upstate. She'd been wanting to show me her favorite hiking trails, and I figured it was as good a time as any to get out of the city. The crisp mountain air, the quiet hum of nature, it was the perfect antidote to the chaos of city life. On the second day, we reached the summit of a trail that overlooked a sprawling valley. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills, golden sunlight streaming through the trees, and a sky so clear it felt infinite. We sat on a rock, catching our breath, and for a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "You know," she said, "I'm glad you came to that networking event." I laughed. "Really? I think I spent the first half of the night trying to escape." She grinned. "You were terrible at it, but I'm glad you didn't." Her words hung in the air, and I realized how much had changed since that night. I wasn't the same person anymore. I'd been broken, yes, but I wasn't broken now. I'd found a way to rebuild, to heal, to trust again. As we sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had pushed me to grow. Gratitude for the people who had stayed by my side. Gratitude for the chance to start over. That night, as I lay in the cabin next to Claire, I thought about everything that had led me here. Emily, Trevor, Diana, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It had all felt so overwhelming, so insurmountable at the time. But now it was just a story, a part of my past that no longer defined me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find out. I didn't need all the answers. I just needed to keep moving forward one step at a time. And I knew, deep down, that I was going to be okay. Better than okay. I was finally free.